Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 52 of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. So today, we've got a very interesting assortment. We've got a couple new animals, a couple remasters, and we've got what I'm really excited about. We've got a new pack that is in the aquarium for all mosasaurs. So if you're a mosasaur lover, you're going to definitely very much enjoy this episode. So we're going to be starting off today. We're not starting off with the mosasaurs. We've got a couple mods from Master Dude, about 4 of them, and we'll go through them. And I'll say, obviously, they're all made by Master Dude as we go along. But we're going to be starting off with the only herbivore of this group. We've got Tenantasaurus. This is a really nice one. Let's see if we can get you in the light. There you are. Look at this wonderful goober. So this is Tenantasaurus. So Tenantasaurus, which means sinew lizard. These guys are a genus of medium, or pretty big actually, ornithopod dinosaur. And it's a relatively medium-sized one, but it can get up to about 6 to 7 meters. So about 20 to 23 feet long, and weigh between 600 and 1,000 kilograms. Or 1,300 to 2,200 pounds of body mass. And what really sets it apart is this really long tail, as you can kind of see here. And it's been stiffened with lots of ossified tendons or bony tendons that gives it a lot of structural strength. So Tenantasaurus itself is known from the late Aptian to Albian ages of the early Cretaceous from western North America. So it dates between 115 to 108 million years ago, and the genus itself contains 2 species, with the first species, Tenantasaurus tilleri, described by John Ahlstrom in 1970, and Tenantasaurus dorsey, described by Wicker, Murray, and Jacobs in 1997. So many species of T. tilleri have been found in many different formations throughout western North America, but dorsey has only been found in like the Twin Mountains Formation in Texas. So very interesting. Though the first Tenantasaurus fossils were found in Bighorn County, Montana, by an American Museum of Natural History expedition in 1903, and then subsequent digs have found quite a few of them, about 4 specimens in the 1940s. And despite the large number of these fossil specimens, it weren't really described at the time. But then Barnum Brown gave it the informal name Tenantasaurus, as we all know of Barnum Brown, quite famous in that regard. He gave him Tenantasaurus, or sinew lizard, because of the extensive stiffening tendons or ossified tendons in its tails. That's what it got its name. And since 1970, there's been dozens of specimens been reported, coming from the Cloverleaf, the Antlers Formation in Oklahoma, Cedar Mountain Formation in Utah. Many different formations that come from roughly the same age, but it's quite interesting. In terms of who it's related to, these guys are very interesting. These guys are iguanodontid, or iguanodonta. They're quite closely related to things such as rhophodontids, that include things like Zalmoxes, so they're quite basal in the tree, split off from them, but they're before things like Dryosaurus and a lot of the early things like Iguanodon, Hadrosaurs, and the such. So in terms of the diet, these guys were herbivores. They lived in ecosystems that were most likely dominated by ferns and cycads, things like that, along with some primitive flowering plants. Lots of gymnosperms and conifers and ginkgos. These guys were most likely a low browser. An adult would have a maximum browsing height of about 3 meters if it stood on its back legs. And this restricted Tenantasaurus, especially as juveniles, to feed on low-growing ferns and shrubs. And it has a very powerful U-shaped beak, as you can kind of see here, very powerful, that would have been used for breaking through all sorts of vegetation, potentially even wood as well, and even fruit that may have been consumed as part of its diet. In terms of predators, there's been an association with these guys. There's a fossil and with teeth found from Deinonychus, which is a Dromaeosaur, and there's been some found at different sites, and there's a 1995 study. It seems to be a common association, but a 1995 study, only 6 sites containing Deinonychus fossils contain no trace of Tenantasaurus, and Deinonychus remains only really found associated with other prey, such as Sauropelta. but seems to be a quite common association with these guys. Though because Deinonychus wasn't that big, it was about the size of a wolf, and then preying on a 1-ton animal. A lot of people think it's a bit of a stretch, but potentially younger individuals, of course. And a lot of these associations with multiple Deinonychus found near Tenantasaurus suggest, oh, it must have been a pack hunter. But it's very possible this could be more like a mobbing behavior like in crocodilians, or full-on pack hunting like dogs and lions do today, though we can't really prove that. It's very possible. And could have been like a feeding frenzy and things like that. But it's also likely that these guys the juveniles would have been preferred by Deinonychus because smaller things obviously a bit easier to kill. And they also would have scavenged like sick and injured, things like that. And these guys may have also been prey for animals such as Acanthosaurus, where it did live in the same areas as these guys. In terms of its reproduction, there's actually the presence of medullary bone and the thigh bone and shin bones of some individuals that suggests that that was a pregnant female. And it's typically only found in birds today. And this animal was likely about not a full adult when she was having babies, so it's likely they reached sexual maturity before they reached skeletal maturity. So she was still growing, but just starting to breed. Because it's typically only seen in birds, and Allosaurus and Tyrannosaurus has also been found with medullary bone, it suggests that medullary bone would have been something very basal in trees, since Tenantasaurus is like in a whole different branch. So it's very possible that dinosaurs ancestrally had medullary bone as well. And there's another histology study showed that these guys kind of grew quite quickly early in their lives, and then they reached sexual maturity and kind of then slowed down. Very much like crocodiles today, and very unusually compared to other iguanodontians, which is interesting. So in terms of its ecology and where it lived and things like that, it lived in the Clovelly Formation. It was by far the most common one, and then the next common one was Sauropoda. It lived with animals such as Deinonychus, an Allosaurid of some sort, and a gophophonid crocodilian. Would live with also ornithopods such as Zephysaurus, Macrothorax, which is an oviraptorosaur, some titanosaurs and ornithomimids, things like that. Also with other small mammals and lungfish. And very other formations of the Atlas Formation, which was stretched from Arkansas to Texas. These guys would have been a large floodplain, would have been drained from the shallow inland sea that, like the Western Interior Seaway, would have lived with sauropods such as Astrodon and Sauroposeidon, along with Acrocanthosaurus and things like that, and would have lived with different amphibians, even Borysogenia, which was like a type of crocodilian, Gophophonus, which is a type of crocodilian as well. Another really interesting assortment of animals, actually. Really, really cool. And these guys most likely would have been living in much more like floodplains, typically quite a bit warmer, like arid to arid, semi-arid with rainfall, subtropical to tropical with forests and river deltas. They're actually quite similar to modern-day Louisiana, so that's quite interesting. So dry seasons persisted to create savanna-like environments as well, and this change in rainfall. There would have been like changes and stuff as time went on. But yeah, really, really cool animal. How can you not love this? Dude, I think, did a wonderful job with this design. I like the spikes. Really accentuates and gets the anatomy of the animal quite well, I think. So yeah, really, really cool. We'll let them run off and do their thing. Next up, which I'm really excited to talk about, we've got a paleo edit. So this is from Shinyosaurus. Really, really wonderful animals. So let's have a looky look at these guys. So you can see here, of course, this is a paleo edit of the Shinyosaurus, if you say that. And we can start off with the head. We can see that head's been made quite a bit leaner. I think the game kind of over-accentuated that a little bit. We can see that it had the big crest that made the skull look wider. But it's also got the name Pinocchio Rex because of its such long snout. It, as I mentioned, is related to like Alioramus and things like that. So very different ecology from your more typical Tyrannosaurs, through things like T-Rex and Tarbosaurus and things like that. But you can really see that long skull. I think it comes up really nice. Could have even accentuated the crest a little more, but that still looks nice. Literally thinned it out. Really interesting in anatomy, like things like Alioramus and Quincysaurus had. Very lean body, kind of the opposite of your big Tyrannosaurs. Nice long tail. You can see the round body, two-fingered hands you see there, and the long legs. But what I really want to see here, show off, is the feathers. So feathers are a very likely thing in Tyrannosaurs. I'll say what. But we know that animals such as Guanlong and Eutyrannus, which is already in the game, of course, had feathers. We have definite evidence. We have the impressions of feathers. But it's other animals such as Tyrannosaurus where it's a little bit more iffy. But what's really cool is we may actually see like a kind of evolutionary climb, or you could say like a transition. So larger Tyrannosaurs may have had less feathers just due to being bigger and having different needs to thermoregulate or control their body temperature. So very possible large Tyrannosaurs may have lost a lot of their feathering, if not potentially all of it, through evolution. But that does not mean you ancestrally don't have feathers. So I think that's really, really cool to show that even the relatives of T-Rex. And plus these guys were living in slightly cool environments. Quincysaurus, I believe, was living in a little bit of cooler environment. As you could see, like in Prehistoric Planet, where it was featured, you could see it was living in almost like a temperate forest. So having some feathers, especially when living in a cooler area like that, would be good. And I think it's still quite possible. It's within the 3-ton range, I'd say, of feathers that Mark Whitten keeps going on about. But yeah, I really like the design. I like seeing more scientifically accurate dinosaurs, of course. And this is pretty much spot on, I'd say, for Quincysaurus. I love the new pattern. Really makes it interesting. I love Mastodutes like edits. The only thing I'd like to see on this is giving it the real feathers. I think that'd be really cool. But you can't quite do that yet, considering how mods be. But that'll be really cool to show off in the future. So yeah, really, really nice Quincysaurus. So we're going to let you walk off and do your thing. Next up, we've got another one by Mastodute. These two have been done by Mastodute. Next one is as well. Next up, we've got Maip Macrothorax. A very, very cool one. This is an accurate remodel or accurate new cosmetic that we get to show off. You can see here it's much better anatomy now, much more accurate to the real life animal. Let's see if we can find one standing in a nice posy. We'll have a look at you, why not? Oh. Here we are. Just trying to find one in a good, there we are, good posture. There we are. So Maip was a large megaraptorid, so related to animals such as Megaraptor and Hervenator. These guys come from the late Cretaceous, or the latest Cretaceous of the Maastrichtian, so right at the end, so like just about when the meteor is going to hit the Earth, from Santa Cruz, Argentina, and it contains a single species, Maip Macrothorax, which is known from incomplete disarticulated skeleton. And Maip is very interesting as it may represent the largest megaraptorid known from South America, and is the largest megaraptorid known so far, so that's quite interesting. So the holotype was found in the by Alex Ronaldo in the La Antilla farm, west of Santa Cruz, in 2019. The specimen was found disarticulated, and it contains a few caudal vertebrae, dorsal vertebrae, ribs, gastralia, coracoid, parts of the scapula, and metatarsal. And some of these bones were described in 2019 by Novice et al., but then it was fully described as Maip as in 2022. So in 2022, these fossils were described and given the new genus name Maip. Maip actually refers to a malicious being in Anarchic mythology and is the shadow of death that kills with cold wind. And the species name, Macrothorax, just refers to its really, really wide or long chest as a reference to its big chest. So in terms of its size, as I mentioned, it's quite big. So Maip was actually about like 9 to 10 meters or 30 to 30 feet long, and is the largest megaraptorid currently known. And it suggested that with the extinction of the large Carcharodontosaurs such as Mapusaurus and Megaraxes, things like that, they went extinct during the really late Cretaceous, like the Cenomanian to Maastrichtian. So it's very likely that the Megaraptorans, along with the Abelisaurs and the Unilagines, which were like large dromaeosaurs, kind of took over those roles of the ecosystem, being those larger top predators. And an analysis of known Megaraptorids suggests that there's two kind of groups. There's a clade that's from South America, Asia, and Australia that's about 4 to 4.5 meters long, or about 13 to 15 feet, from the Birmanian to the Aptian. And after which, there's the Aptian to early Tenorian forms. They got a little bit bigger, about 4.5 to 6 meters, or 15 to 20 feet in Australia and South America. And the Tenorian to Croatian, or Megaraptorids, they got to South America, about 6 to 7 meters, or about 20 to 20 feet. And finally, these really large forms, like Maip and the Maastrichtian, they get to about 7 to 10 meters. And traces of the ribs suggest that these guys may have had a respiratory system, very similar to birds with the air sacs, rather than like crocodilians as well. And as I mentioned, these guys are in like the latest clade, or clade B is suggested of Megaraptorans, so the larger South American ones that relate to like Aestodon, things like that. And as I mentioned, these guys are from the late Maastrichtian age Carrillo Formation from southern Argentina. So there's other dinosaurs known as Aristocursor, which is an ornithopod, Nullotitan, which is a titanosaur sauropod. Those have been found to live within Chylosaurs, Iguanodonts, Hadrosaurs, Noasaurids, and Unilagines have been found in this formation. And fossils of like frogs, mosasaurs, mammals, snakes, and turtles, gastropods have been found, which is really, really interesting. So yeah, really, really cool animal. Nice one done by Master Dude. Nice to see another more accurate one here. You can see that very nice Megaraptoran anatomy. So pretty much would probably look like the real animal. Really, really cool. I'm definitely a big fan. And I think he did put... It looks like it does have some feathers. Yeah, Megaraptorids could have had feathers. And plus it's living in a little bit colder area. Don't blame it. Really, really awesome mod. I'm definitely a big fan of this one. So we're going to let them run off and do their own thing. Last up for our big land animals, we've got, by Master Dude again, we've got Hervenator, which is a very, very interesting one I get to show off. Okay, so there's Hervenator. We'll have a look at you, because you got such nice colors. No, we can't see you because of the cactus. We'll have a look at you. Okay, so Hervenator, these guys were a genus of Megalosaur, so related to things like Torvosaurus and Megalosaurus, from the Middle Jurassic, that's from northwestern Germany, and has the one species, Hervenator albani. So this guy was firstly described or found in 1988, or 1998, I mean, by Fenrik Albart, which was looking for this in the Winhen Mountains. Found the remains of the Ornithopteran Formation, and kind of found all sorts of different marine vertebrates with it, but found this bone as well. And was excavated from 1988 to 2001. So really grabbed all that. The first press release was called this the Den Monster von Midden, or the Midden Monster, and people talking about it being 50% larger than an Allosaur specimen and could reach 15 meters in length. Some people estimate like 12 meters in length, but I think this guy got quite a bit of a shrinking once they actually looked at the bones. And then in 2015, it was announced as a new species of megalosaurid called Hervenator albati, and because with the Venator being hunter, so it's the Winhenberg hunter, you could say. And another kind of Megaloraptor phalanx bones, or a toe bone, or a hand bone, kind of came from the formation, just it may have belonged to this holotype. And in terms of its description, it's been found with a bunch of bones, like the premaxilla and the maxilla, some bits of the face, the gastralia, some bits of the fingers, so partially complete, and some tail vertebrae. Very interesting. And historical analysis suggests that this guy the holotype died at about 9 years of age, and however the age of death might be well over 10 years. And that suggests that the animal was actively growing, but the narrow growth zones were kind of slowing down. So it seems to be a large subadult, so it was pretty much going to be as big as it was going to be. And I believe the size that they put it in may have put it about 9 meters or so, so maybe 10 meters was probably as big as it was going to get. So the length can be estimated, and using Torvosaurus guinei itself, which is estimated at about 10 meters. Some people put them about 9 to 10 meters, so that's probably as big it was going to get. And in terms of its classification, it seems these are closely related to Torvosaurus and Megalosaurus in that group of Megalosauridae. Just putting my keys in there. But after the discovery or the initial remains of Hervenator, there's been other teams looking at different areas and things like that in that formation. And they've found teeth of Leopleurodon, and then they also found a tooth of another theropod and some bone fragments of another theropod, so that's really, really cool. And then they found the lower jaws of, the skull and lower jaws of a crocodilomorph called Metrorhynchus, which was really, really cool. That shows that this actually might be a really good site to find all sorts of different animals and stuff and get a good look at the formation. So yeah, really, really cool animal. Definitely love this interpretation of it. Nice to see some animals that not quite as well known getting some love. So yeah, definitely a big fan. So all of these nice, lovely mods, as you can see here, all these dinosaur mods were all made by the lovely Master Dude. Really done a wonderful job. I love his like patio accurate things, but he's just making so many mods recently, just pumping out literally everything. So really, really cool. But anyway, let's keep on moving. Now we're going to our lagoon. So this one's a kind of a remaster of one of the very first mods I've shown off. This is by Leaf, Megarex Gaming, and Trippy28. We've got Shinyosaurus. So I'm not going to go too much into detail about this guy, but we've obviously covered him quite a few times. This is Shinyosaurus. So Shinyosaurus was a very large ichthyosaur, and there's 37 incomplete fossils found of this guy. They've been found around like the Lunting Formation in Nevada, and this formation was probably in the late Carnian age of the late Jurassic, so between 237 and 227 million years ago. So as I mentioned, this guy lived during the late Jurassic, and has a large skull, so about 2.75 meters or 9 feet long. S. popularis kind of measured potentially between 13 to 15 meters or 44 to 49 feet and weighed between 21 to 29 metric tons. So pretty much the size, it's about the length, but like 2/3 the size of a humpback whale, you could say. But in body mass, the species Shinyosaurus sesquiorensis or Shastasaurus is the one. Would have been one of the largest marine reptiles of all time, measuring about 21 meters or 69 feet and weighing potentially up to 80 metric tons. And that's one we've already covered before. But you can see Shinyosaurus is very different in that regard. It's got a very long snout and these long flippers, very rounded body as well. It was initially interpreted of having grooved teeth, but it was seemed to be present in the smallest juvenile specimens. That's actually now not true. It seems that these guys would have had teeth throughout all their life, so this would be inaccurate because it has no teeth. But it's also not known if these guys would have had dorsal fins. There has been one interpreted here. It's very unlikely, but there are more basal ones with dorsal fins. In terms of history, though, Shinyosaurus was found in a large deposit in Nevada in 1920. About 30 years later, it was excavated and uncovered 37 very large ichthyosaurs. So it got its name Shinyosaurus, which means lizard, from Sonsho Mountains, where it was found. So basically named the lizard of the mountain of where it was found. And S. popularis was then adopted as the state fossil of Nevada in 1984, and began in 1954 until a lot of people named it, which was quite interesting. The Nevada fossil site can currently be viewed at the Berlin Ichthyosaur State Park, which is quite interesting. And a second species was found in British Columbia in 2004 called Shinyosaurus jascarensis, and actually shown it's actually more closely related to Shastasaurus on the Shastasaurus rather than Shinyosaurus. And some people, there's been a bit of taxonomy back and forth, things like that, but really, really cool. And the taxonomy of the site where Shinyosaurus was found, it seems that these guys may have died at varying times and became present at the seafloor and became a symbol of bones. And the lack of fossil invertebrates suggests that these guys would have had relatively poor water conditions or oxygen conditions in the water. So a lot of the cool little bugs and stuff that live in the sediments and things couldn't live there, and which helps preserve the fossils. And I believe there's been some real recent research that suggests that this was kind of a large site where, like a lagoon, where these larger animals would give birth and then leave their babies there or something like that. Like a safe place to give birth, similar to like sharks today, which is quite interesting. But yeah, Shinyosaurus, Trippy8 did a great job remastering that one. So we let him swim off and do his thing. Next up, these four animals, the Platycarpus, Globidens, Cacaephalu, and Prognathodon, these were all done by Hans-Wan-Tree, I believe you say that, and they're all part of his Mosasaur pack, which I'm quite excited to show off, because that was a really, really cool pack, so we're going to get stuck into this one. We're going to be starting off today with Platycarpus. I know you guys are a bit sad about only one coming out, but that's kind of a bug that's known in the pack at the moment. But here we are, here's our Platycarpus. Looks really, really nice. So Platycarpus, which means flat wrist, these guys were an extinct genus of mosasaur that lived about 84 to 81 million years ago, so between the middle Cenotonian to the early Campanian of the late Cretaceous. Fossils have been found in the US, but they've also been found in Belgium and Africa, potentially. And a well-preserved specimen actually showed that these guys would be eating fish, but they would have likely been eating on ammonites and squids and things like that as well. And like other mosasaurs, they were originally interpreted to be swimming around very much like an eel, though more recent studies showed they were swimming around much more like modern sharks with the big lobe at the bottom there. And there's actually a specimen that actually shows skin pigments and the scale patterns of these guys, and show that tail fluke, so that's where they think that didn't have the eel-like swimming, which is really, really cool. And isotopes also suggest that this genus and Cladites may have entered freshwater occasionally, just like modern sea snakes, which is quite interesting. So Platycarpus, as you can see, has quite a large downturned tail with a large lobe on it, which would have been very similar to things like ichthyosaurs, things like that. Great example of convergence. Complete specimen suggests that these guys grew up to about 5.6 meters long, about 18 feet long, and these guys would have evolved into a very specialized group at the end of the Cretaceous. And the skull structure of these guys is quite unique. They have quite a short skull and fewer teeth than a lot of mosasaurs, and they also have a well-preserved retina in the eye, which is quite interesting, and the respiratory tube as the cartilaginous tracheal rings going down it. So that's what we know a little about what they look like, and we can see the bronchi as well. And this also indicates that these guys would have had 2 functioning lungs. So unlike snakes only have 1 functioning lung, but these guys would have had 2, very similar to like monitor lizards and things like that. And but unlike terrestrial lizards, the bronchioles separate in front of the area of the forelimb rather than at the level of limbs, which is quite interesting. As I mentioned, there's also these skin impressions of these guys. It seems like these guys would have had scales that are longer and rhomboidal in shape on the jaws, and then they'll start to overlap, and then they also indicate the nostrils are placed far up the skull, like pretty much there, similar to like early whales in that regard. And body scales are all quite rhomboidal in shape, and kind of had these distinct diagonal rows going along the body, but they're all very, very small. We also found some stuff of the internal organs, which may have been preserved. I think the abdominal cavity as well, lots of iron and hemoglobin, even potentially a kidney, which actually have been in a more anterior position than a monitor lizard as well, so that's quite interesting. And this suggests that this may be similar to why whales have in a similar position, because of getting more streamlined to swim through the water better, which is really, really interesting. And part of the digestive tract also shows that it was eating mid-sized fish, and the presence of scales and undigested bones in the colon of the specimen suggests that these guys would have been eating lots of fish and things like that, with relatives like Globidens, which I'm going to get into soon, eating a lot more hard things like bivalve shells and things like that, and low digestion, which is quite interesting. But you can see here, also you look at the tail, the caudal fin bends downwards, very similar to miniature crocodiles and ichthyosaurs. So instead of being very eel-like, it comes down like that and very much swims like an ichthyosaur or like a shark, which is quite interesting. So as I mentioned, there's various specimens being found around, and they're often regarded one of the most common mosasaurs found in the Western Interior Seaway and can be found in Smoky Hill Chalk, and quite common comparatively. It was first described in 1898, called 1988, and then it was reaffirmed as its own species 2006. Its taxonomy being taxonomy, but it's in the group Platycarpine, which includes other groups of mosasaurs. Quite interesting. In terms of their diet, as I mentioned, these guys don't have quite as robust teeth, so very much eating fish and small squid potentially. And in terms of locomotion, they would have been swimming very much sideways, almost like a ichthyosaur, side to side, swimming around, things like that. And they also have another really interesting adaptation for aquatic life. The small size and similar shape of their scales would have actually stiffened their trunks, so that means they would have been restricted for lateral movement. Improved their hydrodynamic ability, so they'd be much stiffer. And the smaller scales also allow them to be have less drag and be able to swim more effectively through the water. So yeah, really, really cool animal. How can you not love this Platycarpus? And it teaches us that specimen that has like a lot of the organs and the lobe preserved and the scales preserved. It really tells us so much about mosasaurs. So it's a really, really cool animal. And we're going to let them swim off and do his thing. So that was again done by Hans Wachtry, I believe you say that. Next up, we've got a slightly bigger one. We've got Globidens. So this is a really cool one, if I do say so myself. Let's see if we can find one that's in a good position. Not quite yet. We have to wait for a little bit. I'll have a look at this one, why not? So this is Globidens. So Globidens is an extinct genus of mosasaur that is in its own group, the Globidensi, if you say that. It's quite interesting. Was first described, or this first species, Globidens albamaensis, was first described in 1912 by Charles Welch Gilmore, and is used for the type specimen for Globidens. And Globidens belong in the family Mosasauridae, so it belongs with other animals such as mosasaurs, things like that. And specimens of Globidens have been found in Syria, North America, Mongolia, and Angola, and Indonesia. So quite a wide-ranging species, with a couple different species described. In terms of its size, these guys were relatively medium-sized mosasaurs, with Dacosensis, which is another species, measured about 5 meters long, or about 16 feet. And they're quite similar to mosasaurs in most regard. They've got quite long bodies and flippers and a big lobe tail, things like that. But what really set them apart is their teeth. And the teeth of Globidens is quite different from other mosasaurs because it was much more rounded and or globular, or like a glob, with most mosasaurs having very sharp teeth to grab soft, slippery prey. These guys would be doing very different things. So these guys had teeth that were very well adapted for crushing. So these guys would have been very duraphagous, so eating hard things. And this means they could eat things such as bivalves, turtles, nautilus and ammonites and things like that. So they would have been eating a lot of very hard things. And like its larger relatives, it would have had these large jaws or robust built skulls and jaws to have a strong bite, to be able to use these teeth and have a strong bite force to break apart these hard things. So that's really, really cool. And the initial assessment has the skull, but vertebrae as well, things like that, and probably looked quite similar to things like Platycarpus or like Prognathodon, things like that, which is really, really interesting. History of discovery, as I mentioned, was found in 1912 by Gilmore, and was only found from like a skull, single vertebrae, and some fragments, and it was discovered in Alabama, where it got the name Alabamensis, which is the type species or type specimen. And there has been a few species described since. There's some from like Jordan and Angola and Morocco, and the most recent one, Simplex, which is from Morocco. So this is a Moroccan one, and it's from quite late in the Cretaceous, which is quite interesting. And in terms of its classification, it is in the Mosasaurine group, quite a basal one. It's quite similar to things like Cladestes and things like that, before the group Mosasaurini, which is the family of mosasaurs. In terms of paleobiology, as I mentioned, it had these globe teeth, or rounded teeth that are able to better crush things such as ammonites and mollusks and bivalves and things like that. So actually stomach contents found in South Dakota actually support this, and they showed the crushed shells of a giant clam, so that's quite interesting. And paleoecology, these guys would have lived in shallow seas or lived in the seas of the Cretaceous, such as the Western Terran Seaway, which are often commonly found. But so far they've been found in many parts of the world, and probably would have been living in these areas, feeding on all sorts of different hard-shelled animals. So really, really interesting. I do not love these guys. I do love myself a Globidens. I'm really excited that we finally got a Globidens, because it's an animal I've been wanting to talk about for a while. He's so pretty. I really, really do love a good mosasaur too. So, and then we got 4 good mosasaurs, so that's quite awesome. Let you swim off and do your thing. So next up, we've got Kaikaifalu. You guys remember him from Prehistoric Planet. He does look quite similar. So let's have a look at you. Guess we've got a bit of a photo bomber, but that's okay. And we won't worry about the guests, because the guests suck. Anyway, we're going to have a look at this wonderful Kaikaifalu. Really came out in the perfect place to pose for me. So, Kaikaifalu, these guys were a genus of mosasaur that's from the late Cretaceous, but is found in Argentina. Just before the Cretaceous Paleogene event, so this is from the Maastrichtian, hence why it was featured in Prehistoric Planet. And it's thought to be among the largest members of the Tylosaurs, which is a group of mosasaurs that includes like Tylosaurus and things like that. And however, some people will disagree with this classification. So, in terms of its description, these guys, the preserved portions of the skull, is believed to be adult, and the holotype, the portions that were preserved would have been about 0.7 meters or 2 feet long, and suggesting a total skull length of about 1 to 1.2 meters, or 3'6" to 3'9", based on the skull of Tenantasaurus, which makes it the largest known mosasaur from the southern hemisphere, and estimates put it at about 10 meters long and about 3 tons. But apart from its size, it has some distinctive anatomy. It has a prominent ridge in front of the top margin of its eye socket, things like that, and some other characteristics. And heterodont teeth, which means there's more types of teeth in its jaws, which is quite interesting. So there's medium-sized teeth, or conical teeth without any wear facets. There's medium-sized ones with 2 to 3 wear facets, and large conical ones without any, and small blunt ones as well. So this is actually one of the only known heterodont mosasaurs, other than only other heterodonts is Amorosaurus, which is quite interesting. So these guys, it's not known whether Eremosaurus or Kaikaifalu were heterodont, unlike their closest relatives, but it potentially could be just an unusual diet. So in terms of where it was found in January 2011. The Chilean Paleontology Expedition collected a large mosasaur skull along with jaw fragments and a humerus, then about 30 isolated teeth from Seymour Island in Antarctica. And these rocks come from the late Maastrichtian, so the latest Maastrichtian, about 200 meters below the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene. So really, really late in the Cretaceous. And unlike other remains of vertebrates on Seymour Island, these guys were found in yellowish color. And it's just that these guys may have been badly weathered, as have been preserved, things like that. And the name of this guy comes, which is Kaikaifalu Hervani, which is honors Kaikaifalu, which was a reptilian ocean deity from the cosmology of the Mapuche people, and Dr. Francisco Herve, which is a Chilean geologist who has contributed a lot to Arctic geology and the Chilean geology as well. So quite an interesting person, and great that they got honored. And in terms of classification, as I mentioned, a lot of people consider them a Tylosaurine, but in more recent years it's been suggested that they may not have had these features and maybe more Mosasaurine, but it's kind of hard to tell with the stuff that we have. But most phylogenies would put it as a Tylosaurine, at least older ones. It's just, yeah, one of those things. And previously identified mosasaurs found in the same formation includes like Prognathodon, Mosasaurus, Moanosaurus, and things like that. However, since based on the teeth, some of which match the tooth morphology of Kaikaifalu, it's very possible that a lot of these genera were not present They're not all these genera present, and they just were teeth from Kaikaifalu. And it might make more sense because of that really weird amount of large predators in this habitat. But Kaikaifalu also lived with some large Ankylosaurian plesiosaurs, such as Antrodectes, which would have previously been preyed upon by Kaikaifalu. And weird thing about those plesiosaurs is that they most likely were filter feeders, like Manura. So really, really cool. Nice animal. We do love Kaikaifalu. Really, really awesome. Now let's turn this park off because the guests are stinky. So let's close that park. So we're going to let them go off and do their own thing. But last, but certainly not least, we have got Prognathodon. So let me just let those guys swim out of the way. So we got Prognathodon. So I've already covered this guy a couple times because there's been a few Prognathodon mods, but I'm going to just go over it quickly. So Prognathodon is an extinct genus of mosasaur that is considered a mosasaurine, so related to things like Mosasaurus and Cladestes. These guys have been found from the Campanian and the Maastrichtian of pretty much all over the world, from like Middle East, North America, New Zealand, and Europe, so pretty much wide-ranging around the world. And Prognathodon itself means four-jaw tooth, which means basically early jaw tooth, and there's been 12 species known from North America, Western Africa, Middle East, Western Europe to New Zealand, so pretty much from everywhere. And due to the somewhat clear differences in nature, some of these should be species, some of these could be their own genera. It's taxonomy being taxonomy, and when you have such little fossils, it's kind of hard to tell which is which, you know. It's taxonomy being taxonomy. But very interesting, these guys have these large jaws, and we'll get into why that's quite important. So it was first described by Louis Dollo in 1889 in Belgium, where they got named Prognathodon. And then all of the original names were rather comprehensive, things like that. There wasn't much study into it. Then they kind of looked into different studies to compare them to other mosasaurs. And there's been other studies like splitting and genera, naming species, of course. In terms of description, these are quite a large mosasaur. The species here, Salvadori, I believe can get to about like 10 meters long or things like that. The skull of one of the larger species, Bipecuriae, is actually about 1.4 meters or about 4.6 inches. And that could mean quite a large size, 10 meters or 11 meters, and potentially like 3 to 4 tons as well. Even this large one could be about 12 meters long, so that's quite interesting. Though there is many different species, there were some smaller ones, with some being like 6 meters or 5 meters, depending on the species. And other than its like robust nature, another feature that defines it, it's got scleric rings, or sclera rings, which is in the eye, and really helps with like keeping the eye with pressure and stuff like that, and really, really cool. In terms of its skull as well, Prognathodon is kind of well known for having a robust skull, and they show very powerful jaw musculature as well, so these guys would have had quite high bite forces, even compared to like other mosasaurs, and they would have had a bite force potentially of like to like 10,000 newtons, things like that. And quite similar to Globidens, they would have been able to have a very powerful bite to bite into hard things. So they weren't specifically adapted with like the teeth in that regard compared to Globidens. Globidens was quite specialized in that regard. These guys had very typical mosasaur teeth and were quite massive, and potentially would have been using them to bite into larger animals. And as a detention, as I mentioned, they would have had these blunt serrated teeth as well, when there's some variation between the different species as well. So different species will be feeding on different things. That's kind of how ecology works. There would have been different species eating different things, or eating the same things on different habitats. So one may be living in deeper areas, or one in more shallow areas, one in the more open ocean, for example, things like that. And from what we have of the exoskeleton, we don't actually have that much. Mainly it's really known from skulls. And we have some vertebrae, things like that, but it's mostly from skulls. But we do have some pretty well-preserved Prognathodon soft tissue. We have one specimen that shows a lot of the aspects of morphology. It's quite articulated, with some caudal vertebrae as well. It has the tissue outline of the tail fin, very similar to Platycarpus. So we know that they had that tail fin, or tail fluke, with that asymmetric one that kind of comes down to the bottom. And they also found that these have scales as well, so the soft tissue like that would have had the scales very similar to those rhomboidal shapes as well. and the proportions of soft tissue and there can be inferred the shape of these fins. So these guys would have had quite more rounded fins and like larger extent as well, which is quite interesting. And as I mentioned, these guys, in terms of classification, these guys are more related to the mosasaurines, so related to Mosasaurus and things like that. Despite historically they were seen being close to Platycarpus, but it turns out they're quite different. And then we have all these different species. Some from, as I mentioned, the Maastrichtian. Most of them are from like the late Campanian to the Maastrichtian. And some could be very much their own genera as well. In terms of ecology, though, we do have some very interesting preserved animals. We have one that has like a sea turtle and a small fish and a cephalopod in its gut. We also have stuff with like quite high teeth. So we believe their ecology may have been very similar to like killer whales today. So they would have been quite well adapted to crush prey and eating big things and cutting as well. So they would have been pretty much just large macro predators would probably be the best assumption, since we found turtle bones and cephalopods in them. Not quite as specialized by things like lovidens. And in terms of its taphonomy as well, we have one that was quite... one specimen of actually the same species of Satatori, which is described here or shown here, was actually quite interesting. It was likely died of old age or disease, and it would have come down and then was scavenged by all sorts of different shark genera, things like that. But very interestingly, it's possible to actually exclude the possibility that sharks was eating this, because they could have spit this up and had stomach acid burns on them, but they don't. So very possible these guys could have kind of died and then got preserved by being in an anoxic environment and being preserved in an anoxic environment, things like that. So it's really, really cool. And I just love the Salvatore specimen. Really nice mosasaur. Really looks pretty, and I like these spots. They really remind me of like a savanna monitor. I do like savanna monitors. And this is a really, really pretty Prognathodon. Definitely a big fan. So, yeah, I think that's a good place to finish up. That's all the mosasaurs done. So this again was done by the mosasaur pack. So the Platycarpus, the Globidens, the Kaikaifalu, and the Prognathodon are all part of Hangswak Tree's mosasaur pack. So I'm definitely going to put that in the description. And all. But yeah, you can download these guys and put them in a pack, put them in your zoos, things like that. So yeah, I think this would be a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified if I upload anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.